Every October, I watch the same 4 movies: Breakfast at Tiffany's, Rebel Without a Cause, It's the Great Pumpkin Charlie Brown, and the 10 shorts that make up Over the Garden Wall. So given that it's pretty close to Halloween, I thought it was perfect time to make one of the frogs from the Over the Garden Wall episode Lullaby in Frogland. So I started with this knitted frog pattern that I've made so many times. It's by Claire Garland on Ravelry, it's just called Frog, and I spent my first day just knitting and assembling this pattern. And I knitted it out of this 100% wool yarn that I got on Etsy a while ago. I basically exclusively use this green yarn for knitting frogs. They were really popular on social media about probably a year or more ago, and people would knit clothing for the frog, so that's kind of where this idea came from. What I really love about Over the Garden Wall is that in every episode, the characters are they're all themed historically, but they're all themed in a different decade. So the frog episode, I'm pretty sure it's the 1910s-ish, because I'm pretty sure the female frogs wear these huge 1910s hats. And whenever I make anything stuffed like this frog, I add a bit of fabric scraps into the center, and that just saves on stuffing and uses up the scraps of fabric that are too small to make anything out of. I just love my 4 October movies, Over the Garden Wall included. They're just so cozy and perfect for the season. Most people, when they think fall, they don't think Breakfast at Tiffany's or Rebel Without a Cause, but they both take place in autumn, and I think it's just a really subtle aesthetic thing that's running through both the movies. Here I'm knitting the toes on each frog. The legs are kind of annoying because they're knit in I-cords, but they do come out looking really good every time I make them. I just shortened the legs a little bit because on the original pattern, the frog is proportioned very realistically, it's got very long legs. And in order to make the clothing fit a bit better on it, when I make a frog with clothing, I just shorten the limbs a little bit. It just makes everything look more proportional. On day 2, I start with the clothing on the frog, so here I'll explain a bit about that. So here's the plan for this dapper little gentleman. So I wanted to do Regency inspired menswear for this guy because it's just the greatest era of menswear of all time. I'm gonna make him a little jabot out of this white rayon challis, and I might add a bit of lace to it. Then I'm gonna make a waistcoat out of this taupe silk, and then a tailcoat out of this purple silk, and depending if this is too thick or not, I'm going to use either this fabric or this fabric to make him a pair of pants. So as I said, I decided not to go with the 1910s for the frog's outfit like it was in the episode, and of course, since I love everything historical fashion, I chose the Regency era. I just love the tailcoats and the brightly colored silk pants. So anyway, I wanted the frog to have an undershirt peeking out of the waistcoat, but I didn't want to make the full shirt because it was just kind of overkill because it would be covered anyway. So I decided to make what's called a dickie, not the greatest name, but it's basically just the collar and the front of the shirt. So I just wrapped the frog in tissue paper, cut out a pattern, and then cut it into one pattern piece. I tried to keep everything in this project to be just one pattern piece so that I wouldn't have to do so much bulky seaming on these tiny garments. So the shape's a little bit funny, but it got the job done. I just cut 2 layers of that and sewed all the way around so that I could turn it using the seam on the center back edge. I totally forgot to clip my curves and trim my points before turning it inside out, so I had to try and do that off camera while it was already turned inside out. And I didn't show it, but of course I just seamed up the center back. Next was the frog's waistcoat. So for this garment, again, I made a pattern on the frog itself, cut it off, and made it in one piece with a fold on the center back, and it'll just lap together at the front. And I cut this out of some silk that I used on my Regency stays a few months ago, so kind of fitting for this project. Of course, double layering that too, and stitching it all the way around and turning it inside out. But this time I actually remembered to clip my curves and cut my corners. So I thought for a long time on how to do the armholes, and I eventually decided I was going to first try and separate it like an eyelet, which is what I'm doing now. So first I opened a hole using a pin, then with a larger yarn needle, and then with a crochet hook, and then I used my bird scissors, also fitting for an Over the Garden Wall project, to trim kind of like a plus shape on the armhole. Then, this was the difficult part, I tried to tuck all of the raw edges of each corner of the plus shape into the waistcoat itself with varying levels of success, and once I got it to a point where it was kind of okay, I just overcast around that edge in order to keep it from unraveling. I think given how tiny everything I was doing was, this was a pretty good solution to the problem I had. And then I stitched the center of the waistcoat together so that I wouldn't have to worry about actual closures. Good thing about this frog is that he's entirely plush, so I can just kind of like stuff him into whatever clothing he needs to wear. So day 3 was probably the biggest day for this project. I started out with the tailcoat, so I made this pattern the same way as the others. As you can see, it's got a little lapel on it and slopes down at the back, and it folds along the center back. I kind of wanted to do like a waist seam with pleating at the back, but I figured that was a little bit too intricate for this little guy. But I think on this piece you can definitely see the Regency inspiration. And of course, rectangular sleeve pattern for the coat, and I also made a quick pants pattern. So I cut the jacket out of this purple silk that I've had for a long time. It's rather thin, so I figured it would be good for this project. Of course, double layer just like everything else that I've been doing, and again, I sewed around the outside edge. The opening on this one was at the very bottom of the tailcoat. You can kind of see it on the finished garment, but at least it's not on the front. And I had a dark blue bobbin, so I decided to use that thread. I really should have just wound another color. Then I clipped my corners and my curves. Then I turned that inside out and used a knitting needle to get all the small details like on the lapel. And I sewed the sleeves into a tube. So for this coat, the armhole was not quite as simple as the waistcoat. I couldn't set it like a traditional sleeve because I couldn't even fit my finger into the width of the sleeve, so I had to get a bit creative. So just like on the waistcoat, I cut that little plus symbol onto the armhole of the jacket. Then I put the sleeve into the armhole and then put my bird scissors into the sleeve so that when I stitched around, kind of setting it like a normal sleeve, I would have something to stitch against. And I just backstitched around that. It actually worked a lot better than I thought it was going to work. I was quite pleasantly surprised. I don't know how people who make dolls can constantly work at like such a small scale. This was a big challenge for me. Then I worked on the pants, which were super easy. I didn't double layer these like the rest of the clothing. I instead just cut 2 layers, one for the front and the back, and stitched them all around like a normal pair of pants. I'm actually going to make a 1940s jacket out of this corduroy at some point in the future, probably next month. I know you guys like my videos where I follow a vintage sewing pattern, so we'll have another one of those coming up soon. And then to finish all of the raw edges, I used some visible stitching in embroidery thread to hem the top and bottom edges. I'm just doing the back stitch here for the visible stitching. And then to add a bit more detail, I decided to embroider a fly opening and a button on the pants. Possibly not the most accurate to the Regency period, but I think it's a nice detail for the modern eye. Then, on the waistcoat, I used gold thread and French knots to embroider 2 buttons onto the front. I also did a little pocket, but you can't see it when the jacket is on the frog. One last Regency touch, I made a little jabot out of lace for the front of the shirt, and I just gathered that strip and stitched it on. With that, he was all finished. I cannot put into words how much I love this little guy. I think he is so cute, he is historical, and he's over the garden wall, and oh my god, I just love him so much. I thought that the clothing was a bit plain at first, so I'm really glad that I put the extra embroidered details and like the jabot on the shirt. I think it really just brings it all together and makes it look a lot more intricate than the work that I actually put in. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Happy Halloween, and I'll see you in the next one.